Welcome back to Fox Recaps. Today, I'm going to explain the movie The Invasion, released in the year 2007. The movie begins as a space shuttle crashes in the US, inflicting widespread devastation. People are hesitant to touch the debris after the explosion because they believe it's contaminated. Tucker Kaufman, the head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, examines the incident and becomes sick the night he goes home. While he sleeps, strange cellular condensation forms on his face. Elsewhere, Kaufman's son Oliver, who lives with his ex-wife, psychiatrist Carol, has a nightmare and freaks out. Fortunately, Carol is there and she administers his medication before going to sleep. The next morning, Carol gets a call from Kaufman, who demands custody of his son, but Carol refuses and hangs up. She then drops Oliver off at school and runs into her best friend, Dr. Ben Driscoll, who informs her that many scientists have resigned because they believe there's a reason for the catastrophe. On the other hand, Carol discusses her concerns about Kaufman trying to take custody of her son. Hearing this, Ben replies that Kaufman has every right to meet his son. He then drops Carol off in front of her office, but not before reminding her of a dinner party the next day. In the next scene, Carol meets one of her patients, Wendy Lenk, who informs her about her husband Richard's strange behavior. She mentions that when their dog Bobo detected something unusual, Richard killed him without any remorse. This shocks Carol, but she can do nothing more than prescribe some new medications to her patient. Later, on Halloween evening, Carol and her friend Pam take their children around the neighborhood for trick-or-treating. When they approach a house, the family dog starts barking continuously. Just then, the dog escapes and attacks Andy, but the latter doesn't even flinch. Instead, he grabs the dog and starts squeezing its mouth until it's separated. Soon, Carol arrives on the scene and confirms that Andy is unharmed, despite him having blood markings on his neck. Later, she discusses Andy's behavior with Pam, who also confirms that Andy has been acting differently than usual. Just then, Carol discovers an unusual piece of flesh on Oliver's palm and immediately transports it to Ben's hospital, where his colleague, Dr. Stephen Galino, begins the experiments. Elsewhere, Kaufman describes the new life-threatening flu virus to fellow scientists during a conference and proposes an ovulation program to stem the spread. Meanwhile, several infected waiters spit into the teacups before serving it to the scientists in the conference. The next morning, Wendy's husband Richard visits Carol in her office, inquiring about Wendy. Carol immediately dials Wendy's number and finds out that she's on her way. However, when Wendy realizes that her husband is present there, she hesitates and notifies Carol that she won't be attending the session. Instead, she'll be staying at her sister's place for a few days so that she can be away from Richard. Later that night, while Oliver and Carol are on their way to Kaufman's, they are stopped by a panicked lady. The woman screams and warns everyone about an incoming danger when suddenly a car runs her over. Carol exits the vehicle and informs a cop that she wishes to make her testimony as a witness to the accident. However, the cop ignores her request and orders her to leave the place. After a while, Carol drops Oliver off at Kaufman's for the weekend, telling him to contact her frequently and take his meds on time. In the next scene, Carol and Ben attend a party where they meet Czech diplomat Dr. Henryk Belicek and his wife Ludmila, who adore them and think they'd make an excellent couple. Later, they encounter a Russian diplomat named Yorish Kaganovic, who joins Carol in discussing human nature's dark side. After the party, Ben takes Carol home, and before they depart, he tries to kiss her. Unfortunately, Carol backs off, claiming that she doesn't want to jeopardize their friendship. Later, a stranger tries to force his way into the home, but Carol valiantly fights him off. She then locks herself in and instantly dials Ben for help. The next morning, Ben comes over and proposes Carol stay at home, but the latter refuses, claiming that she has several clients to see that day. Later, on her way to work, Carol notices a few people staring at her with strange eyes. She also sees several other people staring into nothingness, as if they have no soul. When she arrives at the office, she's shocked to find out that all her patients have canceled their appointments for the day. She then dials Wendy's number, realizing she hasn't kept up with some of her appointments. However, Richard answers the phone and informs her that Wendy will call her later, as she's asleep. This concerns Carol as she thinks Richard might have done something to Wendy. Fed up with what's going on as of late, Carol conducts an internet search about the weird happenings and finds out that a lot of people have searched for similar incidents. Just then, her assistant Carly approaches her with a cup of tea. Carol, who senses something is wrong with her assistant, refuses to take the tea and orders Carly out of the room. She then receives a call from Ben, who informs her that Dr. Stephen has finished the skin patch examination. After a while, Carol reaches the lab and Dr. Stephen explains that the sample is a spore that takes over the brain during sleep and alters the genetic code, making a person act strangely. Meanwhile, Ludmila calls Ben and notifies him about Yurish's strange behavior. Hearing this, Carol, Ben, and Stephen rush to Belichick's house. There, they find Yurish asleep with severe cellular condensation. Carol attempts to take his picture for analysis, but suddenly, Yurish wakes up and attacks her. Fortunately, Ben intervenes and saves Carol. After this, Yurish crawls on the floor for a while, vomits a weird liquid, and passes away. Stephen chooses to take Yurish's blood sample as part of the experiment, while Carol runs to Kaufman's to get Oliver. There, she notices Kaufman in a meeting with his co-workers, all of whom are acting strangely. Carol is worried about her son, but Kaufman assures her that Oliver is okay at his friend Jean's house. Despite this, she isn't convinced and begins packing Oliver's possessions. But suddenly, Kaufman and his co-workers surround her. He then tells Carol that she will be just like them once they inoculate her, without irrational emotions. As Carol tries to escape, Kaufman tackles her to the ground and infects her with his saliva. Fortunately, she somehow manages to escape and reaches Jean's residence to find her son. However, she can only find Jean's mother, who has been eliminated by the virus. This terrifies Carol, and she starts driving recklessly, causing her to get into a minor accident. When the car doesn't restart, she gets out, but suddenly, some nearby people start chasing her. Luckily, Carol manages to flee and enters a subway station. She gets on the train, where she notices the passengers with the same empty expressions. Just then, she receives a message from Oliver, who asks for help as Kaufman has taken him somewhere. Worried, she tries to ask for his location, but the message fails to send. As Carol cries in despair, a man tells her that she must act emotionless if she wants to save herself. Suddenly, a gang of infected passengers board the train and attack the others. Carol exits the train and tries to save a girl, but fails. Later, she encounters an infected man at the railway station and kills him before he can attack. She then dashes back to the road, where some cops are forcing innocent people to be inoculated. As Carol witnesses this, an uninfected cop approaches her and asks her to flee after noticing sweat on her face. This indicates that the infected people cannot sweat. When she reaches home, she discovers that it's empty, with no signs of Oliver. Panicked, she then rushes over to the Belichick's house to meet Ben, and they decide to stay awake, citing that they might have been affected. Later, Ben decides to help Carol find her son, while Dr. Stephen and his assistant prepare to travel to Fort Detrick, Maryland, to find a cure for the virus. Meanwhile, Dr. Henrik arrives with more inoculated individuals to infect the rest of the house, but the group flees before they're attacked. While on their way to find Oliver, Carol and Ben come across some cops who are forcefully trying to inoculate Wendy. Strangely, Wendy seems to be unaffected by the virus, even after sleeping several times. Seeing this, Carol assumes that Wendy is immune to the virus. Soon, they arrive at Carol's office and begin reviewing Wendy's medical report. Just then, Ben discovers that Wendy has a brain illness called encephalitis, which stops the virus from entering her brain, thus making her immune. Hearing this, Carol suddenly realizes that Oliver is suffering from the same sickness and wonders if he is immune. Meanwhile, Dr. Stephen calls Ben and informs him that they've arrived at Fort Detrick and have started their research on the cure. He also advises the duo to flee the area before the cops inoculate them. In the meantime, Oliver again texts Carol and mentions that he's being kept at his grandmother's home in Baltimore. This worries Carol, and she reveals to Ben that Kaufman has already infected her with the virus. Hence, she's afraid that she'll fall asleep and lose both Ben and Oliver. In the next scene, Ben somehow evades the infected cops and drops off Carol at the station, and the two go their separate ways. Soon, Carol boards the train to Baltimore, where she realizes that all the people are infected. Surprisingly, Jean is also among them, who tries to warn others that Carol is simply acting diseased. Hearing this, Carol makes up an excuse to sleep alone in the bathroom and departs. Later, Gene comes to check on her as he's still skeptical about her sickness. With no options left, Carol removes her shirt and surprisingly, she notices skin patches on her body. Here, it's revealed that Carol has already started cellular condensation, but will only get infected once she falls asleep. Nonetheless, this convinces Gene and he leaves the place. A while later, Kaufman greets Carol and Gene at the station and takes them to his mother's place. Upon reaching there, Carol manages to see Oliver while Kaufman is away. Oliver tells his mother that he's still uninfected despite sleeping every day. Suddenly, Gene shows up and confirms his speculations about Carol pretending to be infected. In order to protect Oliver and herself, Carol throws Gene and knocks him unconscious. She then runs away with Oliver, but Kaufman notices the situation and chases them with his colleagues. Meanwhile, Carol and Oliver manage to hide in an abandoned place, but Kaufman arrives at the location and tries to attack them. A short tussle ensues, and Carol eventually kills him, ending him once and for all. In the next scene, Carol and Oliver arrive at a pharmacy, and Carol takes a few injections and pills to prevent herself from falling asleep. After that, she calls Ben to inform him about their location. Oliver tries to open the pharmacy's storeroom door, but Carol goes inside alone and discovers a few unconscious bodies lying on the floor. When she learns that they're infected, she quietly grabs a gun from one of them and locks the door. Oliver falls asleep after a while, and Carol takes more meds to stay awake. Despite her best efforts, she eventually falls asleep. The following day, all the infected employees at the pharmacy regain consciousness and try to get out of the storeroom. The commotion wakes Oliver and he sees Carol lying down. Realizing that she's infected, Oliver injects some medicine into Carol and saves her. In the next scene, Ben arrives at the location and Carol is happy to see him. Unfortunately, her happiness is short-lived when she learns that Ben is also infected. Ben tries to persuade her to join him and the others in a new society with no crime or war. He also opens the door to let in the infected employees and reveals that immune people like Oliver cannot survive in the inoculated population. With this, the infected try to apprehend Oliver, but Carol shoots all of them dead. She also shoots Ben in the knee and escapes with Oliver in a cop car, only to be surrounded by other infected people. Fortunately, Dr. Steven rescues them in a chopper and leads them to a medical center. Finally, scientists are successful in creating a vaccine, and the whole world is soon administered with it. The strange virus is eradicated within a year, and the world once again reverts back to normal. In an interview, Dr. Steven reveals that the vaccinated people will not have any memories of the earlier events. As the movie ends, Oliver leaves with Gene for school, while Ben is seen reading the newspaper with no memory of being infected. That was all from the video. I hope you liked it. Subscribe for more content like this, and hit the like button to help us out. Also, leave a comment if you want us to recap your favorite movie. Until next time, take care.